Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Luke Johnson, and Troy Wellington Smith is joining me today on our podcast edition of Noetic. Noetic is an intelligent social media platform that you can download for your iPhone or Android devices. You can also go to noetic.app to create an account and discuss things like Troy and I are going to discuss today in our conversation forums. Today, we're going to be talking about the foundational, the pivotal. How many adjectives could I use to describe J.D. Salinger's Catcher in the Rye? I have a lot to say. We might want to have a couple episodes on this if I can entice Troy to do this. But before I jump into my roundabout analysis, it's going to be kind of a hodgepodge thing. I'm just having a cup of coffee here. We're going to take it kind of easy. I don't know if we necessarily have to have a strict form to this conversation since there's so much to say about the book and its impact on culture writ large. Why don't I give Troy the chance to perhaps open with a volley?
Okay, thank you, Luke. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a novel that I, like many others, read in high school, and coming back to it has been a jarring experience. This wasn't my second time rereading it. When I reread it this time, it was probably my fifth or my sixth. But I've also taught the novel, in fact, at a high school. So it's interesting how this is sort of this novel, Catcher in the Rye, has sort of become standard fare for high school English classes, when in fact it's in some ways it's an unlikely classic in some ways in terms of its the very colloquial style in which it's written or narrated, and also the subject matter. It can Holden isn't a good role model for high school kids, obviously, but it's difficult to sometimes teach without not seeming as though you're condoning some of his behaviors. So that's how I would introduce it. My experience with it.
I think before we get into the savory and unsavory parts of the text, we should talk about repeat readings. So my personal experience with the text, I think I read it because I had, it was a very controversial book because it was associated with all these assassinations and assassination attempts, and it had this air of intrigue. I don't believe it was something that was part of my high school curriculum, not because it was banned or anything, but I guess other things in my school district were prioritized, although it is prioritized in many school districts. And you have to wonder, how did a ban, I suppose, like they say this book was banned at one point, right?
Well, it's interesting because I read it, both where I read it and where I taught it, both were Christian schools, in fact. So it wasn't as if it wasn't as if there wasn't a certain I mean, in spite of the values that these schools held, Catcher in the Rye was assigned nonetheless.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this all presupposes that there is a monolithic interpretation of what Catcher in the Rye is and what the values are that it espouses. It can be sort of deceptive because it does have some language that you wouldn't think would be fitting of a Christian school, but I'm not sure that it wouldn't, in its own weird way, bring people to God. Not that I've really thought about it too in-depthly from that angle, but to be honest, you look at things enough, and I think you'll pretty much find yourself reconciled with the Creator. But just my own personal experience is I think I read it out of a fascination when I was like 18 or 19 years old, and I didn't get it. I was like, this is kind of it was written so matter of factly, so conversationally. I was like, I don't understand why this book is great. And I was like, I don't think I like this, or it didn't have an impact on me. And then a couple years ago, I decided to go back to it, and nothing really jumped out at me except for the passage that Mark David Chapman used to defend himself in court after assassinating John Lennon, which is like my favorite passage, and it's kind of marred because of that, which is the passage about wanting to make sure that the children don't fall off the cliff. He just wants to be the catcher in the rye all day. I thought that was one of the most beautiful pieces of writing I had read in a long time, but still nothing really stuck with me. And this third time that I read it, it hit different on so many different levels. I really felt it. And I am now obsessed with Salinger. I'm like 100 pages into Franny and Zoe, and I've bought a bunch more that I was telling Troy about. I've even done background and research into Salinger's family and love interests. Did you see? I sent you the Joyce Maynard article that she did.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd read that years ago, actually, that article. I guess when I was going through my own Salinger phase. Yeah, I guess what I'm reminded of is, right. He had sort of his compound, right, where he would eat a frozen meal for dinner every night, and um, uh, or maybe I'm conflating him with Thomas Pynchon. No, I think it's him.
Well,
He would have,
some people think they're the same person.
yeah, that's certainly possible. But yeah, I remember hearing like he had a very particular. He's very particular about the chair that he wrote in, um, and he was big on frozen dinners. Maybe that's in the Joyce Maynard article. I forget.
Well, the Joyce Maynard article was like reflections of a 18-year-old teenager or something like that. This was the article that was published in the New Yorker or something like that,
Yeah,
that made Salinger reach out to her like 2 days after the fact and start this love affair with this Yale student who was 18. And I think he was in his 50s. So there was quite an age gap, but it only lasted for like a year and a half or something like that. And I think she did a tell all book in her like 40s or whatever. I haven't
yeah,
read it, but yeah, the Salinger family is very interesting. You know, J.D. Salinger has been, hasn't published, I don't think he's published anything since 1965. But you know, when I was doing my research in preparation for this, it was like this whole new timeline emerged of Salingeria. Is that the word for the Salinger
yeah,
universe?
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
so I found an interview with his son, Matt Salinger. Apparently, Matt Salinger is like a goofy actor. He was like one of the jocks in Revenge of the Nerds, and
Oh,
he
okay.
was also Captain America in the Yugoslavian version of that movie in like 1990. And then the daughter, I guess the daughter that he had, and he was married to a Jungian psychoanalyst, and the daughter, that was his first marriage, and
What's a union psychoanalyst?
Carl Jung,
Oh, Jungian. Oh, sorry.
Jungian, sorry,
Yeah,
no
of
problem.
course.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so he had two children, and the daughter, I guess, was not happy with daddy, and she did a whole thing talking about how he was flirting around with like Scientology and drinking his own urine and stuff.
Yeah.
Who knows what to believe? But Matt Salinger seems to be, apparently there's this whole vault of Salinger writings,
Right.
and Matt seems to have control over them. And there's like this tease. Don't quote me that he's got control over it. I don't know exactly who's got control over it, but it looks like they're like slow walking a lot of things that he was writing for like 50 years when he was, you know, not available for
Yeah.
comment or pictures or
Yeah.
anything like that. So you have that to look forward to. Some of that includes uh, what's it, Hapworth. It's like Hapworth something, Hapworth 19th 1945, that was supposedly going to come out on Amazon, but come out
Oh, yeah. Then it
later.
was spoiled, right? I forget
Yeah,
how Amazon spoiled it somehow, as I
yeah.
recall.
There's a whole big drama surrounding it, but yeah. So there's just like weirdness in the Salinger universe that I could go on and on about. And we're sitting here already 15 minutes in. I probably just should start talking about Catcher. But before I can talk about Catcher, I want to just like make like a few observations about things that people don't usually talk about with books. And I want to encourage our audience to like pay attention to these things because I never really did before. And the first edition of Catcher in the Rye came out on July 16th, 1951. July 16th is a major, major day from a calendrical point of view. It's when the Apollo 11 moon landing happened, July 16th, 1969. July 16th, 1986 is when they discovered the Titanic. These are major, major cultural touchstones. And Catcher in the Rye itself seems to have come out in alignment with these other big events. And the cover for the 1951, the first edition, is a remarkable cover. It's the one with the fiery red horse from the carousel scene on the cover. Yeah, you've got it right there. Now, this could be me reaching, okay? But the fact that it's so red is interesting to me. And I pay attention to horses a lot because I see them as sort of alchemical symbols in our culture. And there is a red horse of the apocalypse. And that red horse has to do with war. And I find it interesting there's a big red horse on the cover of Catcher. And if you look into the background there, that is supposed to be, I believe, the New York skyline. But if you notice, there looked to be, to my eye, something that uncannily and eerily seems to foretell what happened on that day in September. Can you see what I'm talking about, Troy?
Yeah. There's some smoke surrounding a tower.
Yeah, two towers. Yeah,
Two towers.
yeah, and that's interesting because this book came out in 1951, and the World Trade Center wasn't built till it wasn't completed till 1970, but broke ground in 1968. So I'm just saying it's weird. I'm just saying it's weird. There's so I guess I want to encourage people to look at publication dates and to like really look at the cover art of stuff. I first kind of like got trained to that because I read Don DeLillo's Underworld, and it too seems to have a foreshadowing of 9/11. Have you read that book?
No.
No.
No, I've read some other stuff by him.
Yeah. So, anyhow, so that's just the book cover. and July 16th is a big day. You can look, there's a great site. You can go on this day for July 16th. You can find out who was born and died that day. JFK Jr. died that day. Eyes Wide Shut by Stanley Kubrick came out that day. You'll see there are a lot of interesting things that happen around July 16th. So, I've done a little crazy spiral there at the beginning. Why don't I hand it back over to Troy?
Well, shall we look at the inside of the book?
Yeah, why don't you talk about that a little bit? I didn't dig too deep in. Are you talking about the dedication?
Oh, I mean, we could talk about that to my mother. Yeah, I never really noticed that. I'm not sure if that's in every edition of this book or not. I don't have my old copy of this book from high school anymore. It got too dog-eared and the spine fell apart. It just wasn't worth holding on to. And I don't remember if that was dedicated, quote, to my mother or not.
I couldn't find anything too terribly interesting. I tried to find something about the dedication because it's in all caps.
Yeah.
And I thought that was kind of unusual, but no one else had really picked up on
italics.
That. Yeah.
Italics.
So,
yeah.
But let's talk about what's between the covers. What would be the first thing that you would want to address?
Um, yeah, I guess. Well, one of the one of the things that I think gets overlooked sometimes, maybe when this is being taught, is that he's narrating um, he's narrating this book from uh, a mental health spa, we might say,
Uh,
outside of Los Angeles. It would appear, right? Because his brother DB comes by um, to give him books and all of that. So um, he's yeah. I guess that, and I guess yeah. I mean, I think there's certainly. I mean, we could talk a lot about psychoanalysis in this book, I
well,
suppose, right?
let's jump into that. If I can add a relevant detail here, because I think it's very important for biographical purposes that people know this, is that Salinger was at D-Day. Okay, Salinger and a bunch of other famous actors and writers were at D-Day, and Salinger had a couple chapters of Catcher in the Rye in his backpack when he was storming Utah Beach. And he was part of the CIC, which was an intelligence program at that time that was used to identify Nazis and work uh, to kind of leave behind installments and whatnot. And eventually it got rolled into Operation Paperclip. Do you know what Operation Paperclip is, Troy?
No, I don't.
So Operation Paperclip is, I don't know how much Salinger was involved in this, but in Operation Paperclip, what happened, this is, anyone can go look this up. I highly recommend an author named Annie Jacobson. She did a couple presentations on C-SPAN. She documents this very well about how the United States government and Russia split up the Nazi scientists after World War II and used them for like our space program,
Right.
and a number of our intelligence agencies absorbed these Nazi scientists. And some of those early projects that were part of Operation Paperclip involved experimenting with psychoanalysis and drugs. And what we see, it's unclear what Salinger's involvement was, because his involvement in the CIC kind of wrapped up about the same time that Operation Paperclip was going. Um, we see, you know, Holden at the end of this book, who's kind of seems to be in some sort of mental treatment center, and Salinger himself was probably experiencing something like PTSD after seeing what he saw at D-Day, along with Henry Fonda, Scotty from Star Trek. Ernest Hemingway was he and Salinger met up in Paris. That's a fun story. Um, there's a bunch of famous people. Yogi Berra was at D-Day, and so you have this combination of someone who's we learn about Holden um, possibly being institutionalized, and J.D. Salinger was possibly being treated for mental health stuff, and then also potentially may have seen at first some of the uh, very preliminary MK Ultra experiments that would come out of Operation Paperclip. And if you don't know about MK Ultra, there's kind of a dramatized version of this that Kubrick illustrates in A Clockwork Orange. So you might, which is based off of Anthony Burgess's book. Yeah. So that I think so. What we're kind of seeing here is there is this cyclical involvement between World War II, Salinger, the book having elements of psychoanalysis, and then it spills over into real life where we have individuals that, I don't make this claim, but a lot of people make this claim that the book itself is some kind of psychological trigger. And that's why it triggers all these assassinations, because it's somehow lassoed into this whole mix of messing with the mind. Had you ever looked into that or heard about that?
Yeah, I think I heard something about that. it. I mean, I don't know if a book could do that. I don't think it would be this book. I guess
Yeah,
that's how I would put that. Um, it doesn't seem to uh, hit a nerve the same way that other books might in that regard.
it's not a particularly violent book. The only thing that could
No,
potentially come close to it is when, Holden wears a hunting cap and he claims it's a people hunting cap, right? And he wears it around backwards. Um, but the only real mentions of violence, and this is an interesting theme to talk about, is that he he can't imagine, you know, getting in a fight. This is a thing that an issue that Holden has. He can just go up and punch a guy or whatever, right? He can't stand the sight of doing violence to another human being. Um, if he was gonna do it, he'd have to do something really dramatic, like I don't know, get him in the back with an axe or something like that. But it doesn't seem to dwell on that issue so much where I could see it radicalizing anyone. Like you said, like
yeah,
it's a there really isn't that much violence in the book, especially not compared to the violence that quote unquote people want to believe. I'm not endorsing this view. I personally don't think this is true. I don't I don't think it's an MK Ultra trigger, but there are a lot of people who say that it is, given the number of people that are involved with it. Mark
mm,
David Chapman, John Hinckley Jr., Oswald, Bardo, and you have to. It's bizarre, but like you said, I don't think it's a book that I find unnecessarily graphic. It's actually
no,
kind of tame.
yeah, yeah, and yeah. I mean, he also Holden is uh, he's not he I don't know, like when maybe when I read this book as a kid, I saw Holden as sort of like this romantic outsider figure who saw through all the BS in society or whatever. But reading it now, um, he just seemed kind of foolish to me and childish. And so I didn't I didn't really see how he could uh, pull someone outside of the bounds of everyday society. He seems more of like a comical figure in upon a a third or a fourth reading.
Well, you've read it more times than me. I have sympathy for Holden. I think, and this will bring up some other issues that are perhaps uncomfortable to talk about, but like I don't see him as kind of like this like art school reject who like I just don't fit in. Like I don't see him like that. I I think there's a lot that's implied about what Holden has seen and what he's a part of that complicates a lot of his relationships with sex and violence. They're not fun things to talk about, but um, two of them that I think are worth two topics that I think are worth discussing are the element of uh, sexual molestation. There's a scene with one of his teachers, right? Uh,
Yeah, Mr.
where
Antolini.
yeah, where he has he has a fondness for this teacher, but he ends up staying over and gets woken up in the middle of the night being petted by his teacher, and it freaks him out. And he talks about how this has happened a lot in his life. I think he says this happened something like 20 times in his life.
Yeah,
I've never been sexually molested. Um, so unless Holden's exaggerating, and I don't think we have a reason to believe that he's exaggerating, I think there is like a little bit of a subplot here about sexual perversion and what it does to a young mind
mm,
and perhaps how that relates to the world. I don't mean to get so dark about these things, but there's a lot going on in this book that I think people kind of overlook.
Yeah,
Do you,
no, I see what you're saying. And I guess, yeah, I guess, I, I, this did occur to me. In fact, maybe I should be more charitable to Holden, just in the sense that I did get a sense that he had gone through experiences like this, um, but at the same time, like his sort of like I don't think that like legitimates his critique of society or the status quo or anything like that. I think he, in fact, I think maybe these experiences um, have made it difficult for him to reconcile himself with um, uh, um, his his the this sort of this world of New York high society that he's born into. Um,
well, the thing I would say here is, do we know that Holden has a cohesive ideological bent outside of just like, oh, everybody's a liar, everybody's a phony, like kind of like a Napoleon Dynamite like caricature. Like, what does it mean when he's like saying that everybody's phony and that everything's a lie? You know, Holden, one of my other favorite scenes is, I've mentioned it already because it's on the cover of the 1951 edition, is how he takes his little sister, his kid sister Phoebe, to to uh to Central Park to ride on the carousel, and she implores him, "Come on, ride, ride, ride." He's like, "No, no, I just want to watch." He takes he takes pleasure in watching her on the merry-go-round. What's interesting to tie this together is that John Lennon had a song called "Watching the Wheels Go By," and and he gets to a point in his life where he has a sort of disengaged. He kind of figures out what the world really is, and he's sort of disengaged, and he tries to take pleasure in people who may still be caught up in the carnival and the amusements of life, and try to have some sort of peace about it, because he does know that the world's a lie, but he doesn't necessarily want to spoil that for his kid sister.
hmm.
And I think there's something profound to that. I personally can relate to this. Like, I have some pretty unusual views about things, and how do I not ruin the merry-go-round for the people that I care about, who very much love the merry-go-round still? And I think that's a profound antinomy and tension that goes on with Holden calling everybody phony and not wanting to participate in the merry-go-round. That's my 2 cents. That's why
Yeah.
that's why I find him, also another reason why I find him to be sympathetic.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing is that Holden's also exposed to some very mature things. There's reference to a secret fraternity in the book,
Yeah.
and it's not specifically named, but I think again it's contained within the name of the book. The name of Catcher in the Rye is uh is based off a poem that we learn about, called "Coming Through the Rye" by Robert Burns. And interestingly enough, Robert Burns also wrote "Auld Lang Syne," the song we sing each New Year's, which is the day that J.D. Salinger was born. So J.D. Salinger was born on New Year's, and he's naming his book after the guy who wrote the New Year's song. And we dropped the ball on New Year's. I'm finding this all very interesting. He is the poet laureate of Scotland, and so I think that potentially offers us a clue into the secret fraternity. I don't know for certain, that is perhaps alluded to in the book.
Um, I'm trying to follow you.
I don't know if I should say it. I should keep it a little
Yeah.
bit mysterious. I mean, I've offered enough clues
I'll,
there for people to figure it out.
yeah, I'll have to think about that some more. But uh, yeah, um,
So what I'm trying to say here is that there, Holden says like he's too much of a coward not to join the fraternity. There's this like expectation that if he doesn't do it, so like Holden as a very young boy is introduced to something that is alien and foreign to. If I was 15 or 16 years old, I mean, I don't know. I mean, would you tell me, Troy, were you part of a secret fraternity when you were 15 years old?
mm, if I were, I could tell you, right?
Right. Well, I wasn't.
Um,
So
but yeah, I mean, there's the abuse of the James Castle
yeah,
character,
yeah.
right? Whose initials are JC,
But
which is worth noting.
yeah, probably a
And
reference to Christ. Yeah.
and Holden won't say what they did to him exactly, but it was crummy or lousy or one of those adjectives that he uses. Um, and Mr. Antolini, of course, is the only one who will touch the body after James Castle has jumped out the window to um, avoid being abused or whatever they're doing to him. Um, yeah, so I mean that's another instance of something that yeah he's been exposed to that not every 15-year-old has, uh, and yeah he's witnessed it firsthand. I think yeah I mean I think part of it part of the reason that maybe I'm not being more charitable, as I said, is that the way he has of telling these things. Um, he's not obviously a polished or um, uh, dramatic narrator. He just kind of um, he just kind of goes from one experience to another, and his vocabulary for articulating these experiences isn't very uh, isn't very what would the word be? Uh, it's not very poignant the way he describes these things, just in the sense that um, just in the sense that he's not very articulate or good at expressing himself, um, and so it's easy to overlook these occasional asides that he makes to these very traumatic experiences that he's had.
Not to mention he's already experienced death in a major way within the family. I feel like I'm like defending Holden Caulfield here. You know, one of my favorite things that I wanted to talk about it is that one of the potential symbols from the book, because I find it super fascinating, is that he has a younger brother, Allie, who dies of leukemia, right? And it seems to have very much affected Holden. So much so that he has Allie's baseball glove. And this was the interesting thing, is that there are kind of profound connections with Catcher in the Rye connected to baseball that I'm still kind of. It's actually. Did you know there's a connection of Catcher in the Rye to Field of Dreams?
Uh, I do vaguely recall that, but I don't remember what it is.
Well, James Earl Jones plays a reclusive writer that Ray Quinzuela has to go on this like spiritual journey to find, and his name is Terrence Mann. And in the book that Field of Dreams is based off of, it's J.D. Salinger. And like the line is supposed to be, my name is Ray Quinzuela. You wrote about, I'm one of your characters come to life, and I'm here to take you to a baseball game or something like that.
Hmm.
And in the movie, they couldn't get J.D. Salinger to do it because he's obviously so reclusive. He wasn't going to be in this record shattering movie, but it was originally intended that J.D. Salinger was going to be part of Field of Dreams.
Hmm.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
And this baseball, I really want to dwell on so Allie had this baseball glove and I don't think we're really told too much about what he wrote on it, except
I
that he was
think it was
playing left field.
poems,
And
right? He'd write poems on it.
yeah, he wrote and so to entertain himself because the kids weren't hitting to left field very much. I don't think it's really specified why, if it's inability or they're afraid of him or what, but uh, he's just out in left field all the time, and just to kind of keep himself occupied, he's reading and memorizing the poems that he has written all over the glove. And I find that to be a really beautiful symbol, or at least a really touching and tender story.
Yeah.
And it's Holden doesn't make a big deal about it. I mean, we learn about this glove here and there. I think he only shows it. Does he show it to Sally?
Uh, I don't
I think
know.
he shows he doesn't want to show. It's very personal to him. I think he
Yeah.
really only shows it to Sally, one of the girls that he has a love interest in, and he's asked to one of the characters kind of bullies him into writing a descriptive essay about it. But I think there's a lot going on with that glove. I haven't completely unraveled it, but that glove kind of stuck out like a sore thumb to me. Like, hey, this is a big deal. And I don't know if I've like sort of figured it out, like with the Field of Dreams connection. I don't even really know what I'm saying, except I know that it exists.
Hmm.
Do you have any thoughts about his glove and what it might mean? Or if there were any other symbols that like jumped out to you that you thought were particularly cool?
Hmm. Um, yeah. The,
I don't know anything about the story that DB wrote called The Secret Goldfish.
well, actually, I was thinking about like, aren't some of the other characters in the Salinger universe? I mean, they did. They were over in Normandy, right? Like, there's I don't know if you've read. I'm trying to remember which collection it's in. Um, but there's one story about I think it's called like To Esme with Love and Squalor. I think is the name of the story, and it's been so long since I've read it. I probably shouldn't be talking about it, but um, it's about an American soldier who like writes this like poem or a letter to like this younger French girl when he's serving or maybe when he's on leave in Normandy. I guess you haven't gotten to that yet.
No, I haven't
but
got.
but there but there is but there is like, and I think did the character Seymour, of the Glass family,
Yeah.
he fought in World War II, I believe, right? Um, because anyway, I bring this up because this is the character who eventually commits suicide, and so I wonder whether that like perhaps his traumatic experiences in the war had something to do with that. Um, and yeah,
Well,
so
there's no doubt that the experiences in the war have affected Salinger in some way. A lot of people think the way that he writes and the reason why he discloses so much through a teenage boy is that he's trying to recapture a lot of the innocence that was shattered
yeah.
uh, in World War II.
Have you seen Finding Forrester?
I haven't. What's that?
It's another movie with like a Salinger esque character. It's played by Sean Connery. Um,
Is it a reference to E.M. Forrester?
no, that's just it's supposed to be J.D. Salinger, really. I mean,
Ah,
that's like all of the backstory because he fought in the war, and he's reclusive now. He lives in New York City, but he's still reclusive.
right.
But anyway, it's about this this African American teenager who sort of has the, this this sort of happenstance meeting with him and ends up being sort of mentored by this Sean Connery Salinger character.
It's a good movie.
It's good. It's good.
Yeah, there's a number. I mean, the Catcher in the Rye and J.D. Salinger, like in so many movies. I remember I mean, there's that sort of breathtaking monologue that Will Smith does in 6 Degrees of Separation, where he talks about Catcher in the Rye. I think that's worth revisiting. It
Okay.
makes you realize like Will Smith is like actually a really good actor. Like
Hmm.
he's more than the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and like Independence Day and action movie hunk, you know, like
Yeah.
he he uh he did some dang fine acting in that.
Hmm.
Yeah, there's Holden transcends a lot of different universes from what I can tell, although I'm not like super familiar with it. Like, but the universes like conflict. Like the sandwich has no mayonnaise, which appeared in Esquire in 1945, has a mention of Holden going MIA during the war. So
Hmm.
that would that would contradict Catcher in the Rye, obviously. Uh, so I haven't been. I'm like I'm thinking to myself and imagining myself like 6 months from now, and I'm like I see myself like sketching out all these parallel universes with all the different Holdens and how there's like a grand unified theory of like time like buried in Catcher in the Rye.
That would I look forward to seeing that.
I just know my crazy brain will go there for a second. One thing I wanted to something I thought was like super interesting, and I've talked to Troy about this off camera, and I want to, and I'd love to do just like a podcast about all this, is that there's like a secret reading list in Catcher in the Rye. And I was able to find all the different books that are in it. And I was actually able to read one of them. And we don't have to go too much into all these, but I was telling Troy something that I have learned. And what, Troy, what am I? I'm 41. How old are you?
37.
So I'm 4 years your senior. Okay. So I got something to teach you.
Okay.
Um, no, but something I've learned is through kind of a deeper readings of movies and books is that it's not incidental why a lot of directors and writers include books in their movies. They want to point to something that they don't have time to really get into and kind of want you to figure this out on your own. Now, what Salinger is trying to tell us, I don't really know. I've only read one of these. One of them was so let me list off the books that I found here. I uh, I think everybody knows that David Copperfield, because it's like in the opening lines. David Copperfield by Charles Dickens is mentioned. Beowulf, Lord Randall and Other British Ballads, Out of Africa by Isaac Denison, or that's her pen name. What's her real name? Karen
Karen
something?
Blixen.
Karen
Karen
Blexton.
Blixen.
Yeah, I read that one, and I have some theories about why he named drop. And he says he gets out of Africa by accident. He gets it. He means to check out one book, and he gets Out of Africa instead, and he gushes about Out of Africa. And I'll tell you what, Out of Africa is a dang good book, and I think I know why he wants us to read Out of Africa. But maybe that's for another day. Uh, the Return of the Native by Thomas Hardy.
Haven't
That's
read
in
that.
there. Of Human Bondage by William Somerset Maugham. I have no idea what this book is about. I'm going to read it. Romeo and Juliet. Hamlet. Now, this is interesting because it's interesting because this book that I'm putting together, I was looking at calendrical stuff. And one of the days that outside of July 16th, another day that I'm very interested in is March 15th, the Ides of March. And I found that on the March 15th, 1948 Ides of March edition of Life magazine, they did a photo essay of Sir Laurence Olivier's Hamlet. So we have a Shakespearean actor connected to a Shakespearean day on Life magazine. And also in Catcher in the Rye, Holden talks about how he saw Laurence Olivier play Hamlet.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be really interesting to see how those things tie together. Again, we get two Dickens books. I have never been into Dickens. I think Troy's read a lot more Dickens than I have. So I'm going to get deep into Dickens. He mentions Oliver Twist Hemingway's Farewell to Arms. I mentioned this because Salinger and Hemingway were both in the war, and Salinger was obsessed with Hemingway and found him at like the Ritz in Paris after the liberation
Hmm.
of Paris, and they got together. And I think Salinger had a copy of a story that he had done for the Saturday Evening Post. Its name escapes me at the moment. He showed to Hemingway. Hemingway took a shine to Salinger and kind of mentored him. And what's interesting, even in Catcher in the Rye, he kind of dogs Farewell to Arms a little bit, but they stayed friends, despite the fact that he kind of dogs uh, 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 Farewell to Arms. I've not read that. The Great Gatsby, and as I mentioned earlier, the best short stories of Ring Lardner. Uh, so, yeah, those are all buried in there. I think they all communicate something different. I could say something about what I think Out of Africa is trying to communicate. I think it has something to do with the suspension of laws of physics. Um, that seems to be. I think that theme is constantly brought up, and I think that that's very interesting that the suspension of the laws of physics is constantly brought up on a coffee plantation in Kenya. So I'll let the big brains out there kind of figure that out. So that's what I think. I think that's part of the reason why we're being pointed to Out of Africa. I don't. Do you have anything that you want to say about this book list off the top of your head?
Um, yeah, I'm trying to think. I think you covered all the bases really. I had forgotten that Beowulf was in there, um, which that's uh, that the interesting story about that work for me is that it was practically unknown. It was just this manuscript that happened to be in the archive in Cambridge, or I believe it was Cambridge, not Oxford, and a, a Dane, NFS Grundtvig, who was a contemporary of Kierkegaard's and a rival of Kierkegaard's, spent a good deal of time over at Cambridge and sort of alerted the English to the fact that they had this amazing old English manuscript with this um, this national canonical work of English literature that happens to be set in Denmark, but is yeah. So that's I mean I don't know what it's doing in Catcher in the Rye.
He says, I passed English all right, I said, because I had all that Beowulf and Lord Randall, my son, stuff when I was at the Wooten School. I mean, I didn't have to do any work in English at all, hardly, except write compositions once in a while. So he's kind of coasting on stuff that he had covered at his prior school. Like, this is
Yeah.
a theme with Holden that he can't stick around. What the larger me, I haven't read Beowulf since I was in a gifted and talented program when I was like in fourth grade.
Was it
And
CTY? Or
it was
was it like when you were in school or a summer program?
It was in while I was in school. Like one
Oh,
day,
okay.
it was
Yeah.
you called it Futura,
Hmm.
I believe. I think that's what it was called. I didn't know. I mean, I was just cool because like once a week I got to like go hang out with all these other kids at another school and do really like have like this really like unstructured learning.
Yeah.
Like while the rest of my class was like doing times tables. And so I got to like do research projects on like stealth bombers and Stonewall Jackson. So I was like a nerd heaven. I think I was like Martin Prince from The Simpsons back then. But they had us read Beowulf or a age appropriate version of Beowulf. I think I may have encountered it again later in high school, but I remember taking a shine to it when I was younger.
I taught Beowulf to gifted and talented students one summer as part of this summer program that Johns Hopkins University does. It was it was strange the stuff we had them read. We had them read Beowulf and Aristotle's Poetics. It just really wasn't. I mean, I guess the point is that it's not age appropriate because the students are supposed to be so bright they can figure it out. But I mean, I don't know how much. I mean, I don't know how much good it does assigning assigning Shakespeare to even gifted students were below a certain age level.
I'll tell you what, man. And having encountering Beowulf when I was like 8 versus like when I was like 17, it definitely had a more profound, or 15, it had a more profound impact on me when I was younger. I was
Yeah,
like, what? He like cut this guy's head off? No way.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I remember it rocked me. That's interesting that they assigned poetics. I just finished not too long ago. I did Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose. Have you read that one?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and so aren't they like they're after the second
The
book of the
second part,
poem.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
about comedy, I think. Right, the
yeah,
second part's
yeah.
about comedy.
So it's like this sacred book that this man, I had a weird experience with that book. My reality sort of melted when I was reading that book. I mean, my reality kind of melts every day, but yeah. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting I mean, Holden's obviously like an underperforming gifted kid. I think
Yeah,
he's probably analogous to like Donnie Darko.
yeah.
There's a lot of like comparative essays out there. And, there's some overlap. But there's a lot of comparative essays between Donnie Darko and Holden Caulfield. But
Hmm,
anyway, so
that's
maybe it has
interesting.
something to do with it being in the curriculum for gifted and talented kids. I don't know.
Hmm,
Uh,
yeah,
as far as the shakes, I mean,
we don't have to
I
talk about that. I mean, that's just
yeah,
sort
yeah.
of
I'm not really prepared to say anything more. Have you read much Dickens? Could you say anything about why the
like
Dickens
why
stuff is
is
in there?
yeah. I mean, like when he talks about David Copperfield, that's just what he when he saw he's done all that David Copperfield kind of crap. That's just sort of um, he's just sort of using that as a placeholder for like I guess like his life story, biographical details, that sort of thing. I haven't read David Copperfield actually, but it's supposed to be um, sort of Charles Dickens' uh, fictionalized biography, from what I understand. Um, so he's here's Holden talking to his therapist, saying, I don't want to go into my life story, and maybe that's because there's some traumatic background there. Um, I don't know if is there another David Copperfield book? I mean another Charles Dickens book he
Yeah,
mentioned that.
Oliver Twist.
Oliver Twist. Yeah, I've
Yeah,
read that. That's just that. Well, that's also. I mean, that's also autobiographical for Dickens, and just in the sense that Dickens obviously came from uh, a working class background, a impoverished family, and uh, Oliver Twist is also coming from that sort of milieu, and
well, I'm going to try to get through them. But although I am also breaking down Blake's The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, so I'm going through Paradise Lost for the first time. Man, Paradise Lost is amazing.
yeah, yeah.
It's a lot better than I was expecting.
Mm.
Although I think there's something potentially deceptive about that. Because it seems like there's a lot of sympathy for the devil. I'm going to be talking about that with Sophie soon. We're actually going to be doing Blake's The Marriage of Heaven and Hell.
Oh, nice.
And
Yeah,
so and he's like dogging on Swedenborg and Milton so much. So I'm like, oh man, I really got to get up on. I don't really know my Swedenborg. I don't really know my Milton. So
yeah. We can talk about Swedenborg's Heaven and Hell sometime if you
yeah,
want.
I definitely
I read that
need
recently.
to like to. How's the recording going on your end? Are you still recording well?
Yep, still recording.
Okay. Um, we've talked about some of the big. I want to see if there are any other major themes that I want
Yeah.
to talk about. Oh, this I thought this concept of dying for a cause. Okay. this obviously has overtones, okay, especially to the assassinations that are involved with Catcher in the Rye. I believe why did Mark David Chapman kill Lennon? He he just said the Catcher in the Rye was a statement, and he killed Lennon, and they found him. And he was furiously reading Catcher in the Rye, and then David Hinckley Jr. Uh, he shot Reagan and Brady because he wanted to impress Jodie Foster, and also because he didn't think the world was worth living in anymore because there weren't any more idols like Lennon to live for. And I don't know what Oswald or Bardo, what they saw, why they what kind of cause they viewed as associated with Catcher in the Rye. Maybe people say there's some sort of communist or socialist bent with Oswald. I'm not sure. Oswald was a big Orwell fan too. He's apparently a big Animal Farm fan. But there's this, with what's the name of the teacher that kind of pats him on the head, kind of groom
Antolini.
Antolini. He says this. He says, "I don't want to scare you," he said, "but I can very clearly see you dying nobly, one way or another, for some highly unworthy cause."
Yeah.
He gave me a funny look. "If I write something down for you, will you read it carefully and keep it?" "Yes, sure." I said I did too. I still have the paper he gave me. He went over to this desk on the other side of the room, and without sitting down, wrote something on a piece of paper. Then he came back and sat down with the paper in his hand. Oddly enough, this wasn't written by a practicing poet. It was written by a psychoanalyst named Wilhelm Steckel. Are you still with me? Yes, sure I am. Here's what he said. "The mark of the immature man is that he wants to die nobly for a cause, while the mark of the mature man is that he wants to live humbly for one." So what's interesting about this is that I tried to find this quote that he gives to Holden, and it doesn't really exist, which is kind of curious.
Does this guy exist? The Steckel?
I believe Wilhelm Steckel exists, but I don't think the quote was there. So if you do enough mental gymnastics, you can ascribe something like it to him, I believe, but it doesn't really exist. It was harder to track down than expected. So we've got something kind of weird here where we have not a completely historically accurate quotation of somebody, but then we're, like you said earlier, if there was going to be a book that was going to be like an MK Ultra trigger, why would it be Catcher in the Rye? There's not, especially here, the advice that we're getting, although this does seem to be coming from a man who is potentially grooming him, the mark of the immature man is that he wants to die nobly for a cause. Well, all these assassins were, prepared to die suicide by cop, but none of them did. Right? I think all of them ended up, Oswald died by Jack Ruby, but, these guys got off on insanity pleas or were in mental institutions. They didn't get death for whatever cause they think that they're getting. Well, the mark of the mature man is that he wants to live humbly for one. So I thought this was interesting. We have all these people who are using the book to try to justify dying nobly for a cause when we're getting directly in the print an endorsement of living humbly for a cause.
Yeah.
I just thought that was intriguing.
Yeah. I that stood out for me too. But again, as you said, you have to balance that with Mr. Antolini's relation to Holden, whatever that may be.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming it's kind of like it was like a potentially sexual thing, but I mean, he was patting him on the head.
Yeah.
It's a weird.
It's ambiguous. Yeah.
It's ambiguous, and maybe that has something to do with something else that we talked about earlier, and maybe it's not sexual at all. But that's what I'm saying. There's a lot going on in Catcher in the Rye. I feel like I'm watching 5 movies at once. I feel like there's a lot of ways to read this thing.
Yeah.
One of the characters that I thought was, I liked Phoebe a lot, the kid sister. And another thing that I've really come to learn is that, the whole line from Romeo and Juliet about how names aren't that important, right? Names are important. I think that's a total psyop. I think names are important. And Phoebe, I looked it up.
Son,
Phoebe,
right?
Phoebe is from the ancient Greek, is a female given name, feminine form of the male name Phoebus, an epithet of Apollo, meaning bright, shining. In Greek mythology, Phoebe was a titan associated with the power of prophecy, as well as the moon. This is an epithet of her granddaughter, Artemis. So we have the Space Force, right? And we're going to put a woman on the moon, or is it Mars? I can't keep track. And so Artemis should be familiar with everybody. So Phoebe was the grandmother of Artemis, and in reality, air quotes, there is actually a moon of Saturn that has the name Phoebe. So I find that very interesting that that Salinger, the book comes out the day that Apollo 11 launches, and we have a character that is connected to the moon. It's actually directly connected to Apollo. I mean, could be mere coincidence. Could be mere coincidence. I don't know what it means, but I find it very interesting. I like names. What do you think?
Yeah,
What do you tell your students about names?
yeah, I mean,
should they read into them, or they're not meaningful at all?
In a novel, they certainly are, right? Because they should never be arbitrary. There should always be a reason behind the name. If not a symbolism, then perhaps something more mundane, like the name sounding, fitting for the character, in terms of their personality or their background or what have you.
Well, the DB name stuck out to me. It kind of. I mean, the first thing that came to mind was, I was like, oh, is there a connection to DB Cooper? But I don't know. I was like, no, Luke, you're just watching too much Twin Peaks. I mean, I don't know. Does Holden Caulfield mean anything? He has a middle name, doesn't he?
Yeah,
it's not mentioned in Catcher, but it's mentioned somewhere else.
Oh, it's not in Catcher. Okay, yeah, I was thinking if Phoebe had a middle name.
Doesn't she keep changing it?
Yeah, Weatherfield was maybe one of the names she made up for herself.
Yeah,
I remember it was like Phoebe Weatherfield.
Caulfield.
But I don't remember her real name.
I found it very interesting. Holden Caulfield's middle name is Morrissey.
Okay,
like the singer
God,
Morrissey.
Yeah.
So
that's weird.
I don't know if there's any connect. I looked into it, and I don't believe the singer Morrissey took it from Catcher in the Rye or from J.D. Salinger. I'm not exactly sure what story it comes out in. Anyway, I thought that was interesting. There was one other, I didn't know there was one other theme that I potentially wanted to talk about. I didn't really know how to make sense of it. And I'll just bounce it off of you. Is towards the end of the book, Holden on his way to get Phoebe. And as he's going around New York City, he sees FU written on all these walls.
Yeah.
And he's really, it really upsets him because he doesn't want the kids to see it, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't want like little kids like his sister to see it. So he tries to like rub it off and he just gets really mad. All I could think of, I was like, well, what is this? What does this FU on the wall mean? Is this like, it's like Pink Floyd tapping into this? Is there some connection there? Or is this a connection to, is there something biblical going on here with like the writing on the wall from Daniel 5, where people are being judged? They have to bring out Daniel, the wise man, has to come out and read the hieroglyphics and tell Belshazzar that he's been judged and is found wanting. But I feel like I'm reaching. I really don't. I just really didn't know what to make of this because it happens kind of like 4 or 5 times.
Yeah, he finds it everywhere.
What do you make of that? Anything?
I don't know. I don't think I really read much into it. Although, that sort of, that should be my job. Yeah, well, yeah, I mean that I think now that word has lost a lot of its bite. But back then, when this book was written, it was probably shocking for some to see it in print.
Yeah. Well, I think I think there's got to be more to it than shock value. But of course, like
of course, yeah.
I'm giving. And by the way, I need to correct myself. I think earlier I said that that Holden showed the glove to Sally. I think it may have been Jane.
Yeah, that's
Jane
right.
Gallagher.
Yeah,
Jane
you're
Gallagher.
Right.
So we haven't even talked about Holden's relationship with the opposite sex. A lot of people think that Holden is like a closet homosexual because he doesn't like devour women like a lot of the other classmates at his prep school. He has to like, there's the episode where he like meets up with a hooker and he has trouble like getting sexy or whatever.
Yeah.
And he has like this idealized kind of juvenile sort of romanticization of Jane Gallagher, who has like a really profound connection with, where he keeps remembering about how they played checkers. And when she would get king, she would keep her kings in the back row. And checkers is like, it's an old game and there's lots of color symbology there. There's a lot going on with the game of checkers that I don't fully understand, but keeping those kings in the back row, and, Holden's always like asking her, like, do you still keep your kings in the back row? Yeah. Like that means something. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's he asked Stradlater to ask her whether she still did that. And he of course didn't expect him to ask her that. I think it's sort of like a symbol of her innocence, the kings on the back row. It seems like, but yeah, I mean, he's constantly saying like, oh, I thought I'd give old Jane a buzz, but then he never does, or maybe her mom answers the phone once. So
yeah, there's that episode like the mom answers, and then he eventually gets to talk to her, and
yeah,
he's like, isn't he drunk or something?
Yeah, at one time. Yeah.
Yeah. She's like, what are you doing? What? So I knew. Well, we've talked for a while, and I could go on and on and on, but I think, this was very beneficial for getting my head around a lot of these, at least getting my head around some of these subjects going on in Catcher in the Rye. I could talk about this book for 10 hours and not cover everything extensively enough. Is there anything else you'd want to say in closing here, Troy?
No, I think I'll save it for next time.
Yeah, I'd very much like to do a second part and perhaps train our focus on the books and maybe some of the other themes that we didn't talk about. We can do it kind of free form again, but I want to thank Troy again for coming back and talking with us.
Yeah.
And I will get this edited and up for everybody tonight, and hopefully, though the conversation was, we jumped around a lot. Hopefully, at the very least, Troy and I have pulled back the curtain and made a case for why this book is so intriguing and why there's a lot more going on here than you may understand. And although I haven't really presented a thesis like about what the book means, because I don't think, like I said, I don't think it means just one thing. But hopefully we've opened some corridors for your own personal exploration of the book. And that's really all we can really do. You know, I don't know everything, people, and neither does Troy, but Troy knows a lot. More than me.
Well,
All right, Troy. Thanks again.
I don't know
buddy.
about that. Yep. Nice talking to you, Luke.
All right. Take care, everyone.
You too.